Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 34. I am your show's host, Kyle, and if you like the show, please share the show. It will help the show to grow and get out there to new listeners. I am planning on doing a show on North Korea sometime soon, so if that's something you would be interested in, let me know. Let me know what everybody would be interested in hearing about in the North Korea show. Do you want history going back to the Korean War, like 1950s? Do you just want stuff maybe from 2001 on? Do you just want stuff most recent Obama and then Trump administration? Let me know. I think there's an awful lot of debate to be had on really what's going on in North Korea. I don't think there's even a consensus in the anti-war community on if North Korea has nukes or not. I listen to people at like Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and they suggest that North Korea may not actually have nuclear weapons at all. But Scott Horton thinks it's a foregone conclusion that the North Koreans likely have around 6 nukes, maybe a dozen nukes. Not hydrogen bombs or anything that could do a ton of damage, but a nuclear weapon, it can, kill millions. So it's obviously very, very serious and a very strong and powerful weapon. And so let me know what angles you want me to cover this from, and I will try to put that together maybe sometime late this week, early next week. If you have any articles or any important information you think now a whole lot of people know about, send that my way as well. I can always share it in my Facebook group and help get the information out there. If you are interested in having discussions about this stuff, join my Facebook group. You could go to Facebook and search Foreign Policy Focus in that search bar, and then you could join the group, and we talk in there about just things going on, foreign policy subjects. People share articles, stuff they've written. Sometimes it's a really cool place to hang out and chat about these kind of things. So if everybody's ready now, I'm going to jump right into the news. I do have a lot of it because last week I covered Trump's 99 days and kind of skipped a news update on Friday, so I have some news going back to middle of next week. The first story I want to cover is that Nikki Haley says that the international community should put more pressure on Russia to give less support to Assad in Syria, and really just, I guess, to bully Russia into giving up Assad and saying that, Assad has to go, and maybe even ending support for the Syrian regime so the rebels could take over. I don't think this was probably something the international community is going to agree to. I think if they would, they've already done it right now. I think in Syria you have a situation where Assad's on one side and ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on the other, and there's enough people in the international community who don't feel like taking the side of ISIS and Al-Qaeda is a good thing. So maybe more U.S. unilateral sanctions going against Syria, but I don't think Nikki Haley's going to rally the international support like she planned. A more recent story about Nikki Haley, however, is one that I read in The Hill, and I guess the State Department released some kind of memo saying that Nikki Haley has to get approval on statements from by the State Department on subjects like Iran, Iraq, Syria, North Korea. Basically, the message to Nikki Haley is you don't get to say what you want on important issues. If you're somebody evaluating the Trump administration from a foreign policy non-interventionist perspective, I think you have to see this as a potentially good move, and is probably a good move. It seems to me that Nikki Haley has never said anything that was really decent. She didn't even pick up Trump's line to be a little bit easier on Russia, and her, one of her first statements coming out of the UN is that Russia has to give Crimea back to Ukraine. I've gone over this story 100 times and how it's completely ridiculous and this is never going to happen. That Nikki Haley doesn't understand international affairs, obviously, when she makes a statement, to being hawkish against Iran, threatening Iran over missile tests, threatening North Korea, refusing to talk to the North Koreans, the Iranians, the Russians, whoever at the UN. So basically this has been a situation where Nikki Haley is Samantha Power, is Obama's U.S. ambassador to the UN. It's really disappointing because whenever Nikki Haley took over the office, I didn't think she knew anything about foreign policy, so I figured, she may get one or two right. How she couldn't be any worse than Samantha Power, because Samantha Power was like ingrained in this ideology that led her to being a liar and bad on every issue. But apparently Nikki Haley just either watched some Samantha Power YouTube videos, or I don't know, but has completely turned into her, and you wouldn't know the difference if you were just reading the statements and not looking at who was making them. Trump made statements around his 100th day dealing with Saudi Arabia, saying the U.S. is losing money giving defense aid to Saudi Arabia. For those of you who don't know, Saudi Arabia doesn't have much of a ground force. I think they have a police force and a really big air force paid for 100% by the USA. It may not paid for by the USA, but all the weapons certainly came from the US, and that the US certainly helps them with all their intelligence and logistics and all that other stuff. So the Saudi Arabians militarily are really relying on the UN, relying on the US a whole lot. So Trump acknowledging this is obviously a good thing, and I think along with the Nikki Haley story may show Trump is maybe moving back in the right direction on some issues in foreign policy. I mean, who knows who's making these decisions? It could be coincidental, and he could be getting worse on both issues. I guess the good news here is that Saudi Arabia is really looking to escalate in Yemen, and so if Trump is making statements against Saudi Arabia, maybe the U.S. won't be a part of that escalation. The next escalation in the war of Yemen is going to lead to a famine there. It seems like a foregone conclusion at this point that there probably will be a famine of some sort in Yemen, but it's going to be a whole lot worse if Saudi Arabia decides to start bombing this port, and hopefully the U.S. doesn't take part in that, but who really knows. We got a Pentagon statement saying the U.S. has killed 350 civilians since August of 2014 in the war against ISIS. Of course, this number is thousands lower than the number given by international watchdog groups like airwars.org. I highly recommend everybody check out Airwars. They do an awesome job covering all of these bombings by countries, both the US and Russia and Syria, ISIS, and I believe in Libya as well. They really take their time to try to match data of like where the airstrikes occurred to where people are reporting people being dead, and do you have any sources like pictures of the body, etc. Like all that stuff. They're really doing a good job of keeping track of that. And so I guess it's a shame that the U.S. government can't even be honest with the U.S. people as to how many weapons or how many people their wars are killing. Maybe if the U.S. civilians had a more accurate picture on the number of civilians being killed overseas, they may understand a little bit more the principles of blowback and the ideas that our wars aren't as successful as our leaders make us believe. Because the way the picture's painted now, the Pentagon says they've killed 80,000 something ISIS members, and they've only killed 350 civilians. And I mean, just on the face of it, those numbers seem absolutely impossible to me, and I think probably to most people who understand the situation, where a lot of the people that they're bombing are hanging out in churches that other people use and markets that other people use, and that they're launching these drone strikes in areas sometimes where they know there's going to be a few civilian casualties, but the price is worth it according to the generals and the people making the decisions. Democratic Representative Adam Schiff has introduced a bill that would have a few things. The first thing it would do is it would end the AUMF of 2001 and 2003. Those are the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. What it would do is replace them with a new authorization of use of military force that would allow the U.S. to attack. I believe the terrorist groups listed were ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and the Taliban, so essentially covering war in Afghanistan, a little bit in Yemen, a little bit in Libya, Somalia, across North Africa and the Middle East, and I guess give almost unlimited bounds on the war against terror. I find it interesting that Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, any of the Kurdish groups, none of them were mentioned in the authorization for use of military force. Al-Shabaab wasn't mentioned either by name, so I just think these are a couple of worthwhile observations. I don't think the introduction of this resolution is necessarily a bad thing so long as it doesn't pass. If it is introduced and doesn't pass, I think this does show that the authorizations of use military force from the past have expired, and they have long passed their purpose, and that a new authorization must be given for the president to continue bombing in those areas. However, I think there is a real threat that this bill would pass. Schiff is really pushing for it. I don't know if Paul Ryan will go ahead with it, just because if it does fail, it may really cause Trump some problems, and so Trump may really look to get back at Ryan for allowing that vote to happen. We have some news coming out of the South China Sea. The Southeast Asian nations I believe it's league, but they had a conference and then they issued a statement after that conference. One of the things in the statement was that they are softening tensions with China over the South China Sea issues. I find it at least coincidental that the U.S. seems to have diverted their attention in that Asia-Pacific region from the south of China coastline to the north of China coastline towards North Korea. And with the tensions decreased, it seems to be a good thing, some good news that we're getting here. I hope, obviously, war doesn't break out in Southeast Asia. It would make trade a hell of a lot more expensive and lower the standard of living for a lot of American people. I do think it's worth observing that the U.S. shifts their attention in the region and then hostilities go down in that region. And so maybe it's one of those signs that points so clearly to a non-interventionist foreign policy is not only best for the U.S., but best for the rest of the world. Trump had an interesting brush up with South Korea. The U.S. recently installed THAAD, T-H-A-A-D missiles in South Korea. Those missiles are anti-missile missiles, so that, they go up and shoot down the nukes or whatever. The U.S. kind of sells them to South Korea and says that they have to be there because of North Korea, and North Korea has weapons that could blow up Seoul. Honestly, I think the U.S.'s intentions are a little different. I think they plan to go after... Maybe go after is not the right phrase to use. I think the U.S. plans to use those missiles more as a deterrent towards China and Russia. All those countries are right in that area there, and these missiles could be used to shoot down any missiles coming over the Pacific towards the United States, as well as the North Korea thing. So I think that the U.S. isn't being super altruistic in installing these missiles. Anyways, Trump then says that he wants the South Korean to pay for the missile system. The South Korean leader says, no, the contract says the U.S. will pay for the system. The South Koreans just provide the land. And then I guess the Trump administration backed down because McMaster came out and said that the U.S. is going to be paying for the missile system. So just kind of an interesting story that I think all of you should know about. Erdogan dismisses another 39,000 Turkish people from their jobs since the coup July 15th of last year, so just over 9 months now since that coup. Erdogan has dismissed a total of 140,000 Turkish people from their jobs and has arrested another 40,000 more. Turkey recently held a referendum right in the middle of April to judge whether Erdogan will essentially keep his emergency powers that he had been given and really strengthen the position of the president. The results of the referendum, at least according to the Turkish government, are that referendum passed, so Erdogan has a whole bunch of more powers and could just dismiss people as he wants. In fact, Erdogan also has the power to censor what's coming to the Turkish TVs and laptops, and he censored or got rid of all dating shows in Turkey, as well as blocked Wikipedia in Turkey. So that's certainly tyrannical actions by Erdogan, and even more suggesting that the man is, likely now the dictator of Turkey, and that Turkey is really no longer a democracy. Some other actions that Erdogan are taking are quite a bit more serious than blocking dating shows, and that is he is attacking US-backed Syrian Kurds. These are YPG fighters. I listened to an interview really getting in depth on who the Kurds are and what all the different factions are. The YPG is certainly associated with the PKK to some extent, but the YPG doesn't take orders directly from the PKK as Turkey suggests. I believe that the PKK is actually labeled as is a group of Turkish Kurds. I should start there, and I believe they are labeled as a terrorist organization on the international stage by the U.S. as well as Turkey. So the PKK certainly has had some affiliation with the YPG. The YPG are Syrian Kurds and Iraqi Kurds who have taken up arms mostly against ISIS, but really against all comers. They are the backbone of the Syrian Democratic Forces. I should note that the YPG isn't solely a Turkish movement, but a majority Turkish movement. There are some Arabs, I believe Yazidis are part of the YPG, so it's quite complicated and hard to understand, but I guess the important part is that Turkey is attacking US-backed Syrian Kurds. This is Erdogan, I think, probably testing waters with Trump, seeing how much he could get away with. As far as Turkey is concerned, the YPG is equivalent to ISIS. They're both terrorist groups, and in fact, I'm sure Turkey would prefer ISIS to the YPG because prior to ISIS really becoming a caliphate and starting to get a little bit more serious, Turkey was allowing for the open collection of funds for ISIS on Turkish streets and was supporting ISIS. There was a lot of oil coming into Syria through ISIS. There was a lot of terrorists entering Syria through the Turkish border. That oil would have been going from ISIS to Turkey through the Turkish border there. And so there's just a lot of connections between the two countries. I guess there's never been anything conclusive to say that the Turkish government endorsed and supported ISIS, but the Turkish government certainly turned a blind eye to ISIS and allowed ISIS to gain power through their allowing this to happen. We also have Erdogan making statements after the attack, not saying, sorry I attacked your Kurds there, Trump, but he was saying that he was just so saddened to see that the U.S. flags flying alongside Kurdish flags, and he was saying that he could attack the Kurds again at any time. So the U.S.'s solution, this is amazing, and I really shouldn't laugh because it's going to really suck for our men and women in service to the United States, but basically what's happened is that to prevent the Kurds and the Turks from killing each other on the Syrian border, the U.S. is now going to put their troops in the middle, hoping that neither of their allies hate the enemy more and attack the U.S. troops in the middle. We are, of course, allies with the Turks and the Kurds right in that region, and so it creates a lot of hostilities and tensions. For years and years, the joke has kind of been that the U.S. is being the world's policeman, and while that's always is said, I don't think it's as clear as where it is now, where the U.S. troops are literally standing between two different factions and saying, don't shoot each other because if you do, you're going to kill us in the middle. We're making a wall. We're using our soldiers as human walls, and if bullets go through them, well, that's a risk we're willing to take, but we're betting that they won't shoot you. I think that in policy is complete insanity. I don't know how much Turkey cares about being in NATO, and I hope that people at the Pentagon are really considering the possibility that one of these two groups opens fires against the other and shoots a bunch of U.S. troops, or U.S. troops get hit with mortar rounds or something like that. It could get very ugly very quickly. I think it's a huge danger in that it may force the U.S. into taking up arms either against at least some Turkey. If the Turkey shoots a bunch of UN troops or blows up a U.S. Humvee, then the U.S. almost has to, I think Trump will see it as a situation where he has to respond, not just bring the troops home. If the Kurds attack the U.S. Certainly has to end its support for the YPG, and if not, start outright bombing the YPG, who they are using to try to take down ISIS in Syria. And so, Trump's just put himself in an awful position here, and to put yourself right in the middle of two enemies and say, you can't hit each other because you like me more than you hate the other person seems like a really stupid thing to do, and completely irresponsible towards the troops who have sworn an oath to do what the president says. Shifting to Africa, Mali will be in a state of emergency for another 6 months. Mali borders Libya, and post-Syrian war spilled over into Mali. There was originally, I believe it's pronounced Tuareg revolution there, that ended up getting hijacked by a bunch of Islamists flowing out of Libya back into Mali, and that's created a position where the Mali government was really losing a lot of territory to the jihadists before the French stepped in not that long ago, and so I guess the situation there is still pretty hairy. U.S. policy in Africa has been slightly, revealed. It was always questioned how many U.S. bases were actually in Africa. The only base the U.S. ever acknowledged was the one in Djibouti. Everything else was just fake or temporary. But now it's revealed that the U.S. has 36 African outposts. So we have some U.S. troops at 36 different outposts, and these outposts are spread across 24 African countries. I think most Americans don't even know the U.S. has troops stationed all over Africa, so it's really important for us to know that and get the word out on this one and say, bring our troops home. Why do we need them in these countries that are in the middle of civil war and strife? It seems to just be putting our men in harm's way. In Pakistan, we have the U.S. killing 7 people in a drone strike there. This is, I'm not sure if Trump had one prior drone strike in Pakistan, but this certainly adds Pakistan to the list of at least Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan as at least 5 countries now bombed by Trump. I'm unsure if Trump bombed Somalia or Libya yet. I haven't seen anything. It wouldn't surprise me if they had, even if there's not an official report saying that, but this puts Trump's number at 5. Of course, Obama bolstered a maybe record 7. So we will now move on to an Israel news story. Israel plans another 1,500 settlement homes to be built in East Jerusalem. This again is just showing that Netanyahu doesn't care a lick of what Trump says. Trump had obviously told Netanyahu to knock out the settlement expansion. And so I guess I find it interesting that on an international stage, other than maybe Kim Jong-un, who keeps test firing ballistic missiles that don't work, the person that really seems to be thumbing their nose most at Trump is US's, most loyal ally, quote unquote, in Israel. And so interesting to note how that works. In Afghanistan, we have the Taliban announcing the start of their spring offensive. Every spring, the Taliban really pick up arms and go back. I don't know if during winter they have farming to do or what. Or after 15 years in America's longest war, that even the Taliban are tired of fighting and need to go home and rest every couple of months. But the spring offensive has come. I'm sure that this wasn't like a set date ahead of time, but it just kind of works with the news because they had that very terrible tragedy there where the Taliban killed 140 Afghani troops, and then we had 2 U.S. service members being killed in Afghanistan. That may have been incident-friendly fire, but certainly good propaganda for the Taliban. This is very concerning that the Taliban control probably close to half of Afghanistan at night, and the Afghani government controls under 60% during the day. And so what a mess. The U.S. is sending another 1,500 troops to Afghanistan this summer, and I guess the Trump administration is considering sending 3,000 to 5,000 U.S. troops. Somebody really needs to tell Trump that sending these troops to Afghanistan is only going to result in more Taliban, more ISIS, and unfortunately more U.S. troops dying. And at this point, Trump should know. He should be able to see, hey, when I send my troops overseas, they get killed places. So I bear the responsibility for their deaths, and their deaths are really piling up under my reign so far. We do have another U.S. service member dying in Mosul, and so Trump, you gotta get it together, or you're gonna see a lot of your troops end up dying. You gotta bring them home. In Afghanistan, not only do we have U.S. troops dying, but under the first quarter, the first 3 months of 2017, deaths among Afghani women were up 54%, and deaths for children were up 17%. Just goes to show the complete failure of the wars and that we need to bring our troops home. In Syria, we have the town of Tabqa, I believe Tabqa. That's a town that the U.S. and Kurdish forces have been trying to take for a while. There's a pretty important dam there that I believe is the dam that creates Lake Assad. It seems that the Kurdish forces there are making a lot of progress in moving towards taking that city from the ISIS that control it now. So I suppose that's a good sign. A lot of civilians seem to be dying in that city from U.S. airstrikes. Part of the reason that the U.S. is focusing on taking this city is because this is the part of the path to get to Raqqa for the U.S. strategy to work out. We had quite a few Israel attacks in Syria. We had one against some Assad-allied militias in the south of Syria, and then we had an airstrike closer to the Damascus airport that apparently had Hezbollah weapons depot. Russia, of course, came out and condemned the Israeli attacks, and I believe this was the time that Samantha Power was busy condemning Russia for supporting Assad. I think this just goes to show that Israel's policy in Syria is really just to see both sides attack each other for as long as possible, and that Israel's really not that concerned in seeing ISIS possibly take regions instead of Hezbollah. So I don't think the U.S. and the U.S. people and the Israelis are on the same page on that one, that the U.S. should really consider their alliance to their Israeli allies. The Syrian government by no means has their hands clean in all of this. They carried out a double strike attack on a apparent White Helmets target. The White Helmets are, of course, the controversial group that show rescuing people all the time, but a lot of people suspect that they're just Al-Qaeda propaganda. The double strike attack did kill 8 rescuers. Double tap strikes are where the country will drop a second bomb shortly after dropping the first one on the same target, and so when rescuers come to drag, people to safety or try to free them from rubble, a second bomb will come down and kill those people. Rebels continue to fight near Damascus in Syria. The fighting is between Saudi-backed rebels and jihadist rebels, who are probably also Saudi-backed, go figure. All the conflicts, all the messes, Syria is a complete disaster. If the Western Alliance and the Israelis would stay out of it, maybe the conflict could one day end and Syrians could get back to their lives. That'll wrap up my show today. If you like the show, please share the show, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can. Let people know about it. Click the share button on the show. If you're listening on iTunes, give me a rating and review there. Also subscribe to the show. If you like the work I do a daily news roundup that gets published on my website, kylesfilesblog.com, and I also publish it at the libertarianinstitute.org. Everybody should check out libertarianinstitute.org. Scott Horton and the rest of the guys are doing a great job over there. I, of course, have the Facebook group Foreign Policy Focus. I have a Facebook page, Kyle's Files. Files is spelled F-Y-L-E-S. I'm also on Twitter at K-Y-A-A-L-E. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next time.